Okay, ready to dive in. Today, we're looking at Michel Foucault's The History of Sexuality, Volume 1, an introduction.
Should be interesting.
We've got some pretty thought-provoking excerpts, and I'm kind of fascinated by how Foucault, really challenges us to think differently about how we even talk about sex.
Yeah, Foucault really flips the script on how we usually think about the Victorian era.
Yeah.
Like, the common narrative is that it was all about repression and all that.
Yeah.
But Foucault argues that, well, it's not quite that straightforward.
Right. Like, we always hear about Victorians being so buttoned up and everything.
Right.
But Foucault's idea of what he calls the repressive hypothesis suggests something much, much more complex.
Totally.
It's almost like they were obsessed with sex even while they were, trying to control it.
Exactly. He talks about, there was this huge explosion of discourse around sexuality in the Victorian era. So instead of just silencing it, they created all these, intricate systems to talk about it, categorize it.
Right.
Control it, basically.
Okay, so instead of sweeping it under the rug, it's like they brought sex into the spotlight, but under very specific terms. Exactly. Can you give us some examples of this, like from the actual text?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about, the shift from silence to detailed confession in religious practices. Suddenly people are expected to reveal their deepest desires and anxieties, right?
Yeah.
So sexuality becomes this thing that's subject to religious scrutiny,
Wow, that's so interesting how something that's supposed to be about personal liberation,
Right.
confessing your secrets,
Right.
could actually become a tool of control.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly the paradox that Foucault is pointing out. And it wasn't just religion. He also talks about, the growing medical interest in classifying sexual perversions at the time. It's all about pathologizing certain behaviors, deciding what's normal and what's not, that kind of thing.
So it's like studying and categorizing sex itself becomes a way of exerting power over it?
Exactly. And this leads into one of Foucault's most important concepts, which is that power isn't just about saying no. It's about controlling what people say and how they say it. He argues that power structures shape the entire discourse around sexuality.
Oh, wow.
Defining what's, acceptable, even desirable.
So it's less about outright censorship and more about controlling the narrative. I can already see how this connects to all sorts of contemporary issues around sexuality and identity.
Oh, totally. This concept of discourse is it's key to understanding Foucault.
Yeah.
He's not just talking about words, but this whole system of knowledge and categories and, institutions that shape how we understand the world, including our own sexuality.
It really makes you think about how much of what we think is natural about sex is actually shaped by these bigger forces.
Exactly. He calls this the emergence of scientia sexualis, which is this whole scientific approach to understanding sex. But he argues that, it wasn't just about objective knowledge.
Okay.
It was a way of exerting power and control over people.
Got it.
And controlling their behavior.
I think I'm starting to see how this all ties together.
Yeah.
Instead of repressing sexuality, the Victorians created this complex system for analyzing and regulating it.
Yeah.
And by doing that, they shifted how we talk about and understand sex.
You got it. And that focus on classification and control led to this real obsession with what they call perversions. Foucault uses this term perverse implantation to describe how this intense focus, might have actually amplified how much these perversions were present in society.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying that by trying to define and control these deviations, they actually just made them more visible?
Yeah. It seems counterintuitive.
It does.
But that's exactly what he's arguing. The more you try to define and categorize something, the more you end up contributing to its existence, even if you're trying to eliminate it.
That's so fascinating, but also kind of unsettling when you think about it.
I know. It's weird.
Yeah, it's like this paradox where the attempt to control something can actually give it more power.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this brings us to another really important part of Foucault's work, which is what he calls the deployment of sexuality.
Okay.
He looks at how the control of sexuality got all tangled up with like other power structures like the family and the state.
So how did this play out like in society? Can you give us some examples from the text like to illustrate this idea?
Sure. Think about like the emphasis on the nuclear family, right? And the control of reproduction. The state was really invested in regulating population growth. And maintaining like social order. Sexuality, especially women's sexuality, became like a key target of all this regulation.
It's like controlling sexuality became a way to control like people's lives and their bodies, even if it was like disguised as progress and scientific advancement.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And you're right. It often was framed as progress. Foucault calls this biopower, this power to like control life itself. And it operates through like discipline and regulation.
This whole idea of biopower is, I don't know, it's really thought-provoking.
Yeah, it's a big one.
I can see how it's like still relevant today, even in ways we might not always recognize.
Oh, absolutely. Foucault's work is all about looking beyond like the surface.
So
you see how power operates in these subtle and often invisible ways. It shapes how we understand ourselves and the world around us. So, you know, picking up on this idea of biopower, it's interesting how it connects back to that idea we were discussing about scientia, sexualis, that science of sex. Foucault argues that, you know, this whole pursuit of knowledge about sex, it wasn't neutral. It was another way to exert power and control.
So it's like the act of studying and categorizing sex, it becomes a way to control it. Can you like elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. Foucault, he traces this back to the rise of confession. In like both religious and therapeutic contexts. He points out how individuals were encouraged to like confess their deepest desires and anxieties, you know, bringing their sexuality into like the spotlight, making it a subject of scrutiny.
It seems kind of paradoxical that something that's meant to be like liberating, you know, confessing your secrets could actually become like a tool of control.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the paradox that Foucault is highlighting, right? He suggests that like the very act of confession, of revealing your innermost thoughts and desires, it can actually make you more vulnerable to being like control.
So it's not just about like what you confess, but the fact that you are like expected to confess. That creates a power dynamic right there.
Exactly. And this links back to his idea of discourse, you know, the discourse around sexuality with like its emphasis on confession and self-scrutiny. It creates a framework where individuals are like expected to understand and experience their own desires in a certain way.
This is making me think about, you know, like the development of psychoanalysis and how like Freud's ideas, while they were groundbreaking, they also kind of contributed to this scientific discourse around sexuality.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Psychoanalysis, you know, with its focus on uncovering like repressed desires and childhood experiences, it took that confessional model to like a whole new level. Foucault argues that, you know, while Freud's theories might have been revolutionary, they also kind of reinforced this idea that sexuality was something to be like analyzed and categorized and ultimately controlled.
It's like we can't escape these structures of power even when we think we're like breaking free or seeking liberation.
It all ties back to these underlying systems of knowledge and discourse.
I guess that's like the big question. Then if our understanding of sexuality is so deeply intertwined with power, then what does it even mean to liberate ourselves?
That's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? And one that Foucault doesn't like necessarily offer any easy answers to. He's not like a utopian thinker. He's more interested in helping us like understand the complexities of power so that we can be more aware of how it influences us and maybe, you know, find ways to resist it.
So it's less about finding like a perfect solution and more about like just developing a critical awareness.
Exactly, yeah. He's encouraging us to question assumptions. to deconstruct the systems of power that shape our lives and ultimately, create new possibilities for understanding and experiencing sexuality.
It's a challenging message, but it's also like kind of empowering in a way.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the ways in which we're not free, and then using that knowledge to like strive for greater freedom.
Exactly. And I think that's why, Foucault's work is still so relevant in a world where issues of like sexual identity and consent and power dynamics are like constantly being debated and redefined.
It seems more important than ever to like understand these complexities.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Especially as we like deal with, new technologies and social media and just like the evolving landscape of sexuality.
Totally. Foucault gives us like the tools to analyze and understand these new landscapes. His work encourages us to ask like these critical questions about who holds power,
right?
How it's used, and how we can resist or even subvert those power dynamics.
Okay.
With that in mind, I think maybe it's time to shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And delve into another fascinating concept that Foucault explores,
right?
Which is this historical shift in the way that societies have viewed death.
Okay.
He argues that there was this move away from like the sovereign's right to kill towards a more, I guess you could say, diffuse power over life itself.
Okay.
This is where things get even more interesting.
So we've been really unpacking some of Foucault's ideas about sexuality and power. And you were just starting to explain the shift in how societies view death.
Yeah.
It honestly sounds a little ominous.
Well, I mean, it might sound that way at first, but it's actually more about like a transformation in how power operates. Foucault argued that in the past, the sovereign, like kings and emperors and whatnot, they held the ultimate power.
Right.
The power over life and death.
Yeah.
And this power was very like direct.
Back then it was public executions and all that.
Exactly. Like these big displays of force to show everyone who was in charge.
Right, right.
But Foucault observed that, starting around the 17th and 18th centuries, things started to change.
Okay.
With the rise of modern states and all these new scientific disciplines, power became, it became less about those big, spectacular displays of force and more about like managing and optimizing populations.
Okay, so instead of like the sovereign's right to kill, which everyone could see,
right,
you're saying there was like a shift to a more subtle and maybe even more pervasive power over life itself?
Exactly. And this new form of power, what Foucault calls biopower, it focuses on controlling and regulating life, but at like a population level.
So like what kinds of things?
Oh, think of like public health initiatives.
Right.
The census.
Okay.
Even social welfare programs. It becomes about managing life, not just ending it.
It sounds, I don't know, it sounds almost like a good thing on the surface, but I can also see how that shift could be, not great.
You're right to be a little cautious.
Yeah.
It's really important to remember that while this shift in power might seem less, overtly brutal, doesn't mean that power is any less real or any less potent. In fact, Foucault actually argues that biopower is even more effective because it operates on such a massive scale. It shapes like the very fabric of our lives.
So like if we connect this back to our listeners, think about, how you think about health and illness, or even like your own relationship with your body. It could be influenced by these biopolitical forces that Foucault is describing.
It really makes you think,
Yeah.
Like are the decisions we make about our bodies really our own? Or are they like subtly influenced by these larger kind of power dynamics at play? Think about like the pressure to conform to certain beauty standards,
right?
Or the way that medical knowledge shapes, our understanding of what it means to be healthy and what it means to be sick.
It's like Foucault is giving us this whole new lens to view the world through, one that reveals these often invisible power dynamics that are like shaping our lives in these really profound ways.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. His work really helps us understand that power isn't just something out there that's imposed on us,
Yeah.
It's also something that circulates within society and shapes our relationships, our identities, and even our own sense of self.
So after taking this deep dive with us into Foucault's history of sexuality, what are like some key takeaways that you hope our listeners will kind of walk away with?
Well, first, I think it's crucial to understand that our ideas about sexuality, they're not like natural or fixed. They're actually products of history and power. What we consider normal or deviant or whatever, that's changed over time, and it continues to be shaped by social and political force.
That's a really important point.
Yeah,
it really challenges us to be more critical of what we often just take for granted.
Exactly. Yeah. And second, I think Foucault helps us see that power itself is much more complex and nuanced than we often realize. It's not just about repression or prohibition. It's also about shaping knowledge, controlling discourse, and ultimately influencing how we understand and experience ourselves and the world around us.
It's so clear that Foucault's ideas are still incredibly relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe even more so now, as we're navigating all these new challenges around technology and social media and just the evolving landscape of sexuality and identity.
I completely agree. Foucault gives us all these valuable tools for understanding how power operates in our modern world. His work encourages us to ask these really critical questions about who has power, how it's used, and most importantly, how we can resist or even subvert those power dynamics to create a more just and equitable world.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it for today.
Yeah.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into Foucault's work.
It has.
Thank you so much for guiding us through these really complex ideas.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas and encouraged you to think critically about the ways in which power shapes our understanding of sexuality.
Yeah, keep those conversations going.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.